Peter Sheehan, welcome to our Eagles Talent video chat. So glad you can join us. How are you doing today?
Not too bad, Sheldon. Nice to be with you.
Peter, you are one of the most in-demand experts out there who really gets businesses to innovate, create positive behavior change. Um, there sometimes I've heard there's a need for change and there's an opportunity for change. What do you find is the most common?
Unfortunately, it's usually the need for change because most people have this philosophy that don't break what, don't fix what ain't broken, and let's wait till we have a quote unquote burning platform before we feel like we absolutely need to do anything. I think the real challenge with that, waiting for a very threatening need, is that by the time it hits and you have that burning platform, you've lost momentum. You probably got much tighter margins in the marketplace. And your staff certainly aren't getting up every morning believing they can conquer the world, right? So we're of a very strong belief that, yeah, it's all right to leverage off a need and to use that as a trigger, but as much as possible and as quickly as possible, go after the opportunities, because people get fatigue around, the house is on fire, the house is on fire. They get much more inspired, much more intrinsic levels of motivation when they've got something to aim at. So I'm about the opportunity more than I'm about the need.
Well, and that's kind of a segue to this next question. And you've worked with so many well-known companies and ones that have been around for many, many years. So there's a long tradition of a way of doing things. Is it fair to say that some leaders in these companies really need to think like new entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Imagine it like a bit of a pendulum. You've got this very traditional leader that's run an organization that's really built around scale and repetition. And then at the other end, you have extremely high risk-taking entrepreneurs who experiment until something kind of pops. I actually don't think we want leaders all the way over this side of that pendulum, because at the end of the day, two things. Number one, change is actually usually slower than the pundits and the external consultants and the quote-unquote thought leaders say it is. But the real challenge the leader has is, even though it's slower than we think at first, once it starts changing, it's faster than we ever thought possible. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's almost exponential in nature. So I would much rather see a leader be kind of halfway in the middle of that pendulum, where they're protecting the business, the goose that's laying the golden eggs, and really looking after the scale and the repetition, because that's how those businesses really make money. But then they leverage the margin, they leverage the momentum, they leverage the scale they have over here to experiment on the fringe of that business. We like to talk a lot about piloting and trialing and having sort of a dedicated managed risk portfolio where they start looking at these more entrepreneurial things, because the big companies have the ability to fund that. If it goes wrong and they fail, it's not going to kill the bigger business. So they're protecting the core while also growing the opportunity on the fringe. That's the kind of entrepreneurial nature we would, in our work, we prefer to see from our clients. I don't want some renegade cowboy leader in there running a $4 billion medical diagnostics division, taking care of one of the biggest healthcare systems in the world, feeling like their job is to throw a bunch of mud at the wall and hoping it sticks. That's actually not very helpful.
Well, that's interesting. You talk about working on the fringe. So you're keeping what works ultimately, that core product or the core service that's provided, and then working on the fringe of where else the opportunities might be.
Yeah, and if you look, so in our work, we do a lot of work with industries and organizations that are undergoing what you would call fundamental change, where it's not just, oh, wow, there's a new technology process that we can use to get this done. It's when their business model is potentially a threat, where the way they get compensated is changing, or the way the market defines value. So really kind of inflection points is a word that's often used. And in an environment like that, what's really interesting is when you go back in history and you study industries that went through those sort of inflection points, those sort of changes, what you work out is that it's never anything that no one predicted that fundamentally changes a business ever. It's almost always something or someone or some technology or some competitor on the fringe that changes, goes mainstream and changes that business. So we really do embrace this concept of fringe, because that's where you find the clues to what tomorrow looks like. The job of the leader isn't to be able to predict things that they can't see. The job of the leader is to make high quality assumptions about the things that are on that periphery. They're already on the fringe.
Right.
Because we found no evidence in any industry ever of something no one predicted fundamentally changing how they make money. We just have never found it.
Well, is there a danger then in a leader thinking about sitting there thinking, "Wow, I either want to be revolutionary or evolutionary"? Am I thinking? And is there a danger sometimes about making that knee-jerk reaction about doing one of those two things?
Yeah, and I think you're back at the pendulum idea here.
Right.
You know, this concept of revolution as though I'm this entrepreneur creating a brand new market space.
Right.
The reality is most innovation is pretty iterative. Yes, the original genesis of the idea or the breakthrough concept could be quote-unquote revolutionary, but no one knows how to get it right the first time. You know, there's a lot of trial and error, there's a lot of iteration, there's a lot of evolutionary process that takes place. So the reality is you probably want revolutionary thinking, but you want evolutionary-based execution, because you go and drop a proverbial bomb inside a well-organized system, also known as a company, then you're gonna create and generate chaos in that environment. So we want high quality, out of the box, for want of a better cliche, thinking, but then you want to be very smart about how you go and execute that. Because in our work and our experience tells us the world's not actually short of good ideas. It's generally short of people with the ability to get them done, the ability to execute them. Right. So good leaders who are very clear on the vision, very clear on where they're trying to go, with a high quality, quote unquote revolutionary kind of thinking, but with a very disciplined approach to execution and getting that done. Now you're talking the real combination of capability that I think leaders need in the sort of fast-paced environments that we operate today.
Right. Well, and you talked about executing and seeing it through. How do you, as a leader, calm the waters, per se, seeing that idea through, where you have some people maybe in the company, doubting that vision, and how do you calm the waters and get people stop people from jumping ship? The ideas.
So seeing the vision and calming the waters are two very different processes, firstly, right? So you could get everyone to really see the vision and understand it. They still might want to jump ship, because understanding a vision and having what's called self-efficacy, or a sense of belief in your ability to get it done, or overcome the fear you have of maybe the investment you have to make in the short term to get the results in the long term. That's the stuff that makes people jump ship. So let's start with the first question, which is how do you get people to understand the vision? It's about clarity and confidence, really, right? So people will naturally gravitate towards a leader who's very clear on where they're trying to get to and the value of that. What we find often in our work is that the leader is really quick to get kind of a concept of where they want to go, but they don't go and do the next 90% of the work. They don't get below the water level and go, here's what that would look like executionally. Here's what that would look like in terms of how we go to market. Here's what that would look like in terms of our sales process. Here's what that will look like in terms of the journey to change. I think you do a much better job of helping people understand where you want to go if you get out of just the vision piece and into, but here's what that's going to look like when we're doing it piece. Right. And by default, you get that bit right, then it's much easier to alleviate fear and instill a sense of confidence in your people's ability to get there, because they can now see themselves in that new reality. Does that make sense? Like, if you get it off the mountaintop and the just tip of the iceberg, and you get into that deeper articulation of where you want to be and how it's going to look when you're there, then now people start going, oh, I can see what my job would look like in that, or I can see how I'd get compensated there, or I can see my clients buying that. And all these bits, it's all coming from this concept of efficacy. Do I believe, personally, me as an individual, that I can be successful in that reality? Right. And that's sometimes quite a slow and high-touch process. And it means the leader has to not spend just 10% of their time thinking about what to change. They need to spend the other 90% on how we're going to get there. Like, what communications are we going to need? What compensation systems are going to align to that? What structures are going to best get there? And that's the one that CEOs always go with that's probably the least effective. What behavior will I as an individual need to exhibit to have my team believe that I'm also on the journey with them to get there? These sort of concepts, so these are kind of levers of change, if you will. That's where the leaders should be spending most of their time. Articulate the vision, show people what that's going to look like when we get there, then go to work on how you're going to kind of make that transition. And In reality, I'd say most leaders do it the opposite. They spend 90% of their time thinking about where they want to end up and only 10% of their time thinking on how they're going to get there. We think it should be flipped, and it should be 10% on where you want to go, because that's really the easy bit. 90% on how you're going to get humans to make that transition.
You know, you're so right, and you really need that teamwork of the other members of the company to make that vision happen, right? And without that buy-in, it doesn't happen, right? With their help, their execution, of the marketing, of the sales, of everything else.
Yeah, and buy-in's not about pitch it and they will follow.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
Buy-in is essentially a process of alignment. There's a wonderful both practitioner and researcher, a guy called Dr. Peter Feuder, who's actually an Australian guy, funny that, and he's looked empirically at how does a leader make the sort of transformation from, traditional manager to contemporary leader. And alignment is essentially the key message. Does the way I show up every day at work, is it representative of the future, often called leadership symbols? Are the structures in place around how people report, what systems we give them, are they in alignment with the future? The way we pay people, is that in alignment with the future? The processes we have for getting things done, is that in alignment with the future? Because here's what happens. You have an organization that's built perfectly to maintain, scale, and repeat the status quo. And then you go, but here's the new vision. And then all you do is go, come with me, are you ready? Let's go on a march together. And you don't change any of these underlying drivers of behavior, essentially. And the beauty of the leader's role, yes, you need buy-in, and yes, you need people on board. But the unique contribution the leader gets to make is they have the ability to pull these levers. They have the ability to instigate change at that sort of systematic level. And good leaders understand that. They understand their job is around alignment, not just creativity.
Also, as a leader, it's okay not to have all the answers, right? Because
in fact, your job is not to have the answers.
Right.
As a leader, it's very interesting now with what we can do with data and analytics. The ability to actually identify who makes the best decisions inside an organization is pretty exciting. We were working with a retail client who used a thing called predictive markets. Just imagine a stock market, but what you're buying and selling is the accuracy of predictions of volume of units sold. Okay, so let's say we're going to launch a new product, a new SKU, and then we go, let's go ask the company how many of these SKUs, how many of these units we think we can move. And then they all make bets, and there's a limited pool of funding, and you get to buy prices based on popularity of predictions, a little bit of wisdom of crowds kind of stuff. Anyway, the recent result that we saw is that the person responsible for setting budget, in other words, predicting volume, was the worst at predicting volume. And that, in fact, the people much closer to the front line had a greater sense of what the market appetite for that would be and how quickly they could move it. Now, there could be a little bit of confirmation bias happening, whereas if they believed in it, they're going to get behind it, and that's why the volumes reacted. So let's not dissect the theoretical, the scientific method behind that. The interesting piece that we took out of that and our client took out of that is maybe your job as a leader is not to just come up with the answers and hand them down. Maybe your job as a leader is to create the setting, invite the contribution where collectively you come up with the better answer. Because if no other reason, having people involved in that and having them kind of put their commitment on the line, that in itself becomes a powerful trigger for change, because you now have social proof, you now have identity-based decision-making. I'm not going to get too much into what those theories are, but this idea of, well, I was responsible for saying we'd sell 5,000 of these suckers, I better go sell 5,000 of them.
Right.
So the leader's job actually is probably the opposite of having all the answers. It's to make sure they have the right questions, so collectively we end up with the right answers. And one of the challenges is we've set up this belief system that the leader is the all-knowing, all-powerful, El Presidente kind of concept, where really great leaders facilitate their teams to do good work. You only got 60, 70 hours in a week anyway. I mean, some of these guys 80 or 90, but hopefully 50 to 60 if you're lucky. You're really not getting it done.
Right.
It's your people that are getting it done. So let them come up with some of the answers and see what happens.